Hello, this is the recorded lecture for Chapter 1, looking at healthcare analytics. And this first chapter really looks at how our an overview of really what our healthcare system looks like right now, and its application of healthcare analytics, in some cases inappropriately or not utilizing healthcare analytics to evaluate the plethora of information that we have now in our system. What we're really going to talk about first is really how we develop an improvement or create improvement through healthcare analytics. Most healthcare organizations, HCOs, really claim to be taking or undertaking quality improvement, but the truth is that most of them have many projects. Few have sustainable results. Few use analytics as a resource in developing and maintaining their projects, so they really don't know what the success level is or what their goal specifically is, or if they attain their goal, or if their goal is sustained over an extended period of time. A common problem is that healthcare organizations will develop a program, if you will, or develop a process through quality improvement, and that process will be put in place and it will dwindle over time. So as time goes on, the process starts to revert back to what it was before. It takes an extraordinary amount of effort to create change, and just identifying the changes doesn't really result in change. You have to put up roadblocks, you have to put up conduits so that organizations will have no alternative but to make the change. That not making the change is more painful than making the change. In most cases, that doesn't happen. What happens is that organizations identify change, but then there's no downside to not following through on the change. Now, most organizations, healthcare organizations, really have a lot of data, but it's not very well organized and it's not a usable format, and there's no systematic or standardized process to measure whether they're successful or failure. And you have to be very careful about how you decide success or failure. I always use the 6 Sigma rule. There's 6 Sigma is SIX Sigma is a way of looking at quality. And what 6 Sigma says is some of us think that if we get 97% correct, we're doing just great. That's a really good result. If that were true and that were applied to, for instance, safety in airplanes that are flying in the United States, 18 airplanes would fall out of the sky every day. Not very successful. If we applied it to all the surgeries that are done in all the hospitals, we'd have over 2,000 botched surgeries, and also not very successful. If we applied it to elevators and the safety parts of elevators, we'd have about 1,200 elevators that would fall to the ground, kill everybody inside every day. So you can see that percentage isn't really a good measurement, yet we use that consistently and recurrently when we're talking about whether our process is successful or not. The goal of success is to create a process that has little variation, that is easier to follow than not follow, has more carrots to follow it than punishments not to follow it, and that makes things easier for the people participating. Now, healthcare is really undergoing a radical transformation right now in our society, and that's driven by necessity and opportunity. And necessity is really, our healthcare system is less efficient, less safe, and less sustainable than it's been in the past. And the truth is that we'll see later in this lecture is that even though it's not as efficient, we pay more than any other developed country or any other country in the world. So technology can impact the quality of healthcare delivery, and if we use it, but just having technology and not applying it to improvement doesn't really help. Now, data can give healthcare organizations insight in their performance, and it can provide a focus for their future, if you will. The danger is data overload, where it's what do you call paralysis analysis. I always like that term, where we basically have so much data that we're scared to move because we don't know what to do. And we have more and more systems which are developed to provide greater information that create that overload. For instance, we have systems that identify patients by GPS, so we know where we're at in the hospital. We We have systems that do patients' vital signs and forward that to electronic medical records. We can do point-of-service tests like blood glucose and pulse oximeters and things like that, which are automatically forwarded to the electronic medical record. And those give us lots of data, but we may not appreciate the variation of that data and how that can help us to make better decisions. Now, data, when you start to talk about data, you have to learn how to harness the data. Data is like riding the wild tiger, and that is that it's better to be on top than in front, because tigers tend to be pretty destructive with what's in front of them. And if you're on top, then you better be holding on. So the idea is that it has to be organized to take advantage of the technology. Just having technology doesn't really help. If you had a computer in your house but you never turned it on, you'd never appreciate the technology. We have to use that to improve our clinical outcomes and performance, which is the most important piece here. But in addition, there has to be a use to harness data to control our fiscal issues in our hospital. Financially, we have to be able to provide the best care with the least amount of expense. We have to provide optimal patient care so that we aren't looking at 97% success but 100% success. We have to improve our turnaround time so that our resources are used efficiently. I always marvel at the MRIs, for instance, in big medical centers. They run 24 hours a day. Literally, you can be scheduled for MRI at 2 o'clock in the morning. That's a very good use of the resource. When you think about an MRI machine being about $11 or $12 million, it's important for a hospital to recoup their costs in that, and the demand is always great. So hospitals that don't put that on a 24-hour basis will often not meet the demand, will not pay for the product, the MRI machine, and they'll lose out. Where hospitals that do a 24/7 process, where it's around the clock, really do reach the point where they get the maximum use out of their MRIs. Plus, with technology, as it advances, an MRI may have a life expectancy, technologically speaking, of less than 5 years. So you've spent $12 million, you have to recoup that within 5 years and actually make a profit to pay for the salaries of people that maintain the machine, the people that run the machine, the people that read the MRIs. All of that has to be of value and covered. So being able to measure the organization's performance in all those areas and seeing how to maximize that's pretty important. Now, analytics, the term analytics really consists of tools and techniques, and these tools and techniques really allow organizations to take that data and gain knowledge from it and insight into processes. And without analytics, information is not really actionable. It's just stuff. It's just a big pile of stuff. I always remember I worked at a medical center in my past, and they used to have a dashboard. And the dashboard had been developed 10 years before and had information that had no usable, was unusable. It didn't really tell you much of anything. It was based on old measurements and old technology and old attitudes, and it really didn't help us. When we talked about changing the dashboard, the CEO and CFO and CIO were just went crazy because they had it for so long they depended on it, even though it told them nothing. And so it took a while to convince them that that really wasn't the dashboard was a good idea, the idea of the dashboard, but that the measurements had to be ever changing, ever improving to meet the new technology, the new processes, the new flow through the hospitals. So that's something that's very important. Without, like I said, without analytics, information is not actionable and usable for improvement. It's more difficult to obtain, share, and apply. Having information isn't helpful unless it does something for you. And analytics can be the most powerful tool ever when combined with quality improvement processes. And quality improvement means TQM, total quality improvement, CQI, continuous quality improvement, rapid quality improvement, RQI. All of those, if you will, Six Sigma, all of those go along with developing quality processes where you look at all the processes, you stage those processes, you map them, and you create improvements that are sustainable. That's really the importance here. Now, the current state of healthcare cost and quality, analytics in healthcare exists for improving the safety of the patient and the staff, making the processes more efficient and creating more efficiency with patient care as well as employee processes, and overall improving the effectiveness of healthcare. The present state of healthcare is not in a very good place. Healthcare workers are consistently overwhelmed and they're understaffed. I believe the CNA, the California Nurses Association, has made an estimate of the positions that are still open in nursing shortages, if you will, and we still have around 1 million nursing positions that still go unfilled within the United States. That's pretty serious. And the problem is some of that is that some of those positions are in the rural areas where it's hard to find a population to support it. Some of those issues are hospitals in parts of an urban area which may be a high-risk area, if you will, high gang-related area and that kind of thing, and people don't want to work there. So there's a lot of issues that go along with that, but still 1 million positions that are open. Now let's look at this comes right out of the book, and we'll talk about we'll go forward and I'll come back here. This really looks at healthcare costs, and I'll go back in the slides, but I want you to see this. This is the United States. Now I want you to see that of our GDP, that's the amount of resources we create every year, the money that the United States creates every year, 19% goes to healthcare. And what makes this really a sad issue is that we pay far more than anybody else in the system, including the people that have national health insurance, by the way. We pay far more, and the quality of our health care is far less. And I'll show you more about that in just a minute. So here we have the present health care is far from infallible. The IOM study done in around 2000 was stated to err as human, building a safer health system, suggests that medical errors are the leading cause of morbidity or mortality in healthcare, and that these are the major cost expenses that we need to alleviate. That report cited that between 44,000 and 98,000 patients die annually just due to medical error, and those medical errors include adverse drug reactions, which by the way are the major part, improper transfusions, surgical injuries and wrong side surgeries or surgeries done on the wrong person, suicides, restraints that are not handled correctly and related injuries from that, death from those restraints, falls out of beds, burns when patients are not kept in a safe environment, pressure ulcers when their patients aren't moved when they're bedridden, and mistaken patient identities. All of those add up to between 44,000 and 98,000 patient deaths annually. That's a pretty sad rendition of our healthcare system. Now, healthcare errors result in substantial financial burden. It's been estimated that the cost of those errors is between $17 and $29 billion annually. And the majority of those are due to the convergence or the coming together of multiple contributing factors that are caused by inefficiency in our system. I mean, nobody's saying that there's a deliberate malpractice going on or there's recklessness or there's negligence. This is just basically system problems that are causing this result. Now, obviously, healthcare organizations are under pressure by not only insurance agencies, the government, CMS, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, to improve quality and patient safety, to improve patient satisfaction, to adapting to changes in legislation and regulation, adapting new technologies and for more efficiencies and better patient care, demonstrating improved patient outcomes, and remaining sustainable and competitive. So healthcare organizations have all this on their plate to try to accomplish pretty much at the same time. Now, I want to talk a little bit about some of this, about each one of these. Improving quality and safety. For instance, improving quality. Handling patients who have chronic diseases like, for instance, diabetes. The whole medical world knows that patients who have diabetes should be checked for their glycosylated hemoglobins every year. They should have ophthalmology checks every year. They should have consistently be foot care training and foot care checks every regularly. That their blood sugar should be checked regularly. They should they should be followed very closely, and yet that doesn't happen in many cases. Patient satisfaction. Often patients are treated not as individuals but as a collective group, cattle, I'll use that term, and so they're very unsatisfied with that. Patients all have different needs and different requirements depending on their disease and also depending on what's available to them. People who have a chronic disease probably are also having economic issues, because if they have chronic disease, it's hard to work with a chronic disease usually, and that chronic disease may result in job loss, and so now they're on assisted medical care. Adaptive changes in legislation and regulations. Those change regularly, sometimes the good, sometimes the bad, but a healthcare organization needs to adapt each and every time to those changes and really look and strategize on what is best for the patient, what is best for the organization, and how to create that. Adopting new technologies, being able to bring in new technologies and improve patient care and the quality of results for patients. That's pretty important. Now, it's expensive, but that's important. Demonstrating improved patient outcomes, showing that you've done the processes and that you've had sustainable efforts. Sustainable efforts means that they are ongoing forever, if you will, in this improved patient outcomes. I remember back in the 2001 or 2, there was a national collaborative called the Surgical Infection Prevention Program, SIP Collaborative. That collaborative came out of University of Oklahoma. It was coordinated with all of the different subspecialties, surgical specialties, and what it basically looked at was how we use antibiotics in surgery. And before that, most often what would happen is patients go into surgery, and when they came out, they may or may not get an antibiotic, and that created a high incidence of post-surgical infections. And I can't even begin to tell you the cost of post-surgical infections. Well, it was determined that under all sorts of studies that if you took a patient, excuse me, and that you gave them antibiotics prior to the surgery, just prior to the surgery, it would be in their bloodstream, so that when they made the cut in the tissue to do the surgery, that when the patient would bleed into that wound, that blood would have the antibiotic in it. And so when the blood clotted and the tissue was brought together, it would be hard for bacteria to start infection because the antibiotic was right in the tissue. So it was very helpful. It doesn't work so well after the cut, because if you give antibiotics after the surgery, because when you make the cut, you cut the blood vessels, so you decrease the circulation to the area, making it hard for antibiotics to be successful. When we applied that nationwide, we reduced surgical infections by down to single digits compared to what they were before as far as percentages. And like I said, improvements have to be sustainable and competitive. They have to be, it can't be the project of the month, so to speak. I always call that the flavor of the month club, for people to give these little projects and they do every month and they show them and everybody claps and it's wonderful, and the next month they're not there anymore. So that's the way you have to look at this process. Now, the challenge to healthcare organizations is they have two competing but nevertheless complementary goals. One is they have to balance the need to improve and innovate, and they also have to provide safe, efficient, effective patient care. And you say, well, those are the same, and they should go together, and I agree. They're complementary, but their financial, human, and technical resources are very different. So trying to improve and innovate is expensive, and then trying to maintain has its own expenses. So it's an additive process, not use the same resources. So resources are limited, and often those resources are shrinking due to decreased paying by insurance companies and the government for resources for care, decreased pool of all of that. So it's a problem. Now, HCOs clearly have to reduce unnecessary death and injuries, and following the Six Sigma approach, that should be zero. There should be zero causes of death and injury from safety issues inside of a healthcare organization. Those reduced issues stemming from substandard quality. There should be no substandard quality in a healthcare organization. Now, the U.S. pays, like I said before, pays the greatest amounts for its health care. We'll see on the next slide. I've already showed you. And yet we consistently rank 19th or 24th among all nations in the quality of our care. So we're paying the most dollars by far, and yet the quality of the care that we deliver is 19th to 24th. That's horrible. That's all encompassing. For instance, in OBGYN, mother and baby areas, we are 19th in the world in the quality of our care, in the very basic providing of care and services for delivery of babies. That's a sad, sad rendition of our system. as it presently is here. And I showed you this before, but I want you to look at how high the expense is in the United States and how it comes down here. And you can look at all the other nations, and like I said, many of these nations have national health insurance. So the old bat that says national health insurance is too expensive and you can't afford it, I would say that when people are able to provide a better quality of care for lesser financial costs compared to us, maybe national health care insurance isn't really the terrible thing that we've been told, been asked to believe. So we have to ask the question, what really is healthcare analytics? That's really the definition. If you look in your book, there's a nice little gray area which just has this definition, and I'm going to read it because I think it's important that we understand it. Healthcare analytics consists of systems, tools, and a variation of techniques that help healthcare organizations gain insight into current performance, guide future actions by discerning patterns and relationships in the data, using that understanding to guide, and I will say, strategic decision-making and tactical decision-making. Strategic means long-term decision-making. Tactical is more timely, if you will, more in the very near future. Those are extremely important. Having data doesn't really help you if you don't use it. And I used the analogy before of the computer. Having a computer in your house that you don't use isn't really helpful technology. If you turn on the computer, you use the internet to gain information, now it's helpful. And if you have a computer and you have no idea how to Google something or to look up data or look up references, then it doesn't do much for you either. So having that doesn't really help unless you know how to use the tools and they're applicable and the results are sustainable. So healthcare analytics, the opportunity healthcare analytics can improve the quality of patient care, can increase value to patients so that they're getting more for their dollar, and as importantly, can raise the bottom line for healthcare organizations. Analytics help reveal and act on opportunities for transformation improvement. And non-healthcare successes, we've seen them before, are like in Google and Amazon, which has used analytics to create improvement in processes and to streamline redundant processes or inefficient processes. So let's look at why quality improvement projects generally fail. Most healthcare organizations participate in them, and the trouble is few actually result in any quality or improvement in quality or any improvement in performance. Many quality improvement projects aren't even aligned with the organization's strategic plan. They may have a quality improvement project that may actually be in opposition to their strategic plan. And most modifications created by most quality improvement projects fail because they're not sustained. They die a very quick death. Now, I like this also quote from the book. It says, healthcare is the most difficult, chaotic, and complex industry to manage today, and the hospital is the most complex human organization ever devised. That is the truth. Most hospitals, whether they're private or whether they're publicly owned, have to cater, if you will, or are responsible to a governing body of some sort, whether that's stockholders or the governance committee or whoever that is. They're responsible to them, or the state for that matter. And the problem is that the state doesn't usually see one healthcare organization as an organization. It sees it as one of many, if you will, in a group. So it globs them together, and they may have very different problems and responsibilities. Making changes in healthcare organizations is difficult because you have competing resources and competing intents. For instance, physicians usually don't own the hospital, but they dictate the care that's provided in the hospital and the resources that are supplied to help them do their care. The people that own or manage the hospital, the administration people, they manage the budget, but that budget has to also be able to support the physicians that they require to provide the care they have, including subspecialties and all of that. Nursing is asked to provide that supportive care in the hospital, and yet often they're understaffed. Often they have the least strength as far as the voice in how the hospital is managed. the chief nurse is often not even part of the ruling group. The CNO, a chief nursing officer, is a position that is works with the chief financial officer and the chief information officer and all those, and they work for the CEO. And yet sometimes the director of nursing falls under the COO, chief of operations, chief officer of operations. So making changes in a healthcare organization is a very dynamic environment and different from one to the other depending on the culture. Innovations healthcare unfortunately occur at a rapid pace, so as the improvements occur, you have to meet those improvements. You have to be this chronically moving, sustainable, transformational kind of culture, so you can appreciate the benefits of those innovations. Emerging patient demographics are presenting a new treatment and for treatment challenges. Patients are very mobile in this age, and so patients' healthcare has to be portable also, and their healthcare history has to be portable. Having a paper record at Hospital A does not help Hospital B when they have to treat the patient, because getting that paper record is pretty difficult. Having an electronic methodology to gain that data is very helpful, and yet we're just starting to move towards the electronic medical record, a health record, EHR in this book, electronic medical record in lots of places. They're the same thing. We're just moving to making that happen. And our workflow parameters in our hospitals can change from year to year depending on what's going on. For instance, there are some tests, if you will, where there's some studies that may have been very popular 5 years ago that aren't done anymore, yet we still have the same workflows that suggest that there's still going to be a high volume of those. And yet we have new procedures that we don't have the workflow parameters supporting them. So it's kind of this very hard thing to get a hold of when you're talking about how to do that. Leveraging information technology, healthcare information technology, HIT, they're the largest drivers of healthcare innovation because they own the technology. They can provide the tools required to monitor, evaluate, and improve healthcare quickly. And so they can help to divide those, and they should be involved in all the quality improvement projects because they can tell you how to get there. Healthcare organizations must use data to monitor and evaluate ongoing changes and to fine-tune improvements to make them sustainable. I've said that lots of times. I'm trying to emphasize that. Technology combined with strong leadership, a clear vision, a culture of innovation can create sustainable, meaningful change. I've said sustainable again. It must be important. Now, there's kind of a gap we talk about. Healthcare organizations are drawing from diverse professions now to form these quality improvement teams and innovation teams to include nurses, physicians, and administrators, which was historically in that group. But they're adding engineers and computer scientists and other specialties so they can understand how things work and look at process planning. They can map processes now, and they can do process mapping so they can tell what steps are important. Defining what steps have value and what steps don't. Sometimes we create steps that have no value whatsoever, and yet they remain in the process whether they like them or not. Sometimes we have redundant steps where we do the same thing multiple times without any improvement in the outcome. Those are also important things to eliminate. Now, successful quality improvement initiatives require strong executive support. If the middle management wants these things to happen and the CEO doesn't, they won't happen. You have to have quality improvement expertise. You have to have subject matter expertise, the people that know how it should work. And you have to have health improvement management and analysis expertise to eliminate knowledge gaps. All of these are necessary to create that improvement, and yet most quality improvement initiatives don't have all of these people involved. We're learning, but we're not there yet. We look at the analytics knowledge gap. You see the healthcare management leadership sit here, quality improvement sits here, information technology sits here, and this is like the Bermuda Triangle of no information. It doesn't cross over. Quality improvement is sort of a mythology that sits at this side. Health management leadership is sort of this ivory tower here, and information technology is another little understood technology understood group over here. So you have to put these together and create a consistent collaborative effort between those groups. Now, we talk about leveraging information, healthcare improvement. There's a big term we call big data, and that just means we have large data sets. I will suggest to you that the data sets we have today will be minuscule, the book says the same thing, compared to the data sets we're going to have in 5 years. So big data isn't really the big problem. The way we collate and facilitate and evaluate data is the problem. If you can filter data easily, it takes a little button and basically in a database you can filter out what you don't want, what you don't need very easily. So it's not so hard to do, but you have to have an understanding of what's not important, what is important. More technology means more data. As healthcare organizations become more data focused, they become inundated with the data. And like I said, they go through analysis paralysis. My favorite term of every term from IT. That is basically analyze everything, which results in no change. So we're looking at data, but we're not doing anything with it. Health organizations may not be sophisticated in understanding and applying that data, and that's where healthcare analytics really comes to play. It helps us understand what the data really says and what the strategic plan should be, what the long-term goal should be, and how to create a sustainable result. Now, traditional data tools are outdated, and I could say that of the tools we use today in 5 years, these will be outdated. And the reason is because as analytical tools become more commonplace, the questions being asked are far more complex, multifaceted, multi-causal. We're starting to look at causal effects. How, if a patient comes in late, what's the cascade that occurs in the quality of care in that patient? Where do the problems exist, and how can we eliminate them? Now, questions are related to all the aspects of a healthcare organization. Obviously, they want to look at the quality of healthcare to patients, regulatory issues, and how we can meet those requirements, and all the financial pressures so the healthcare organization can be a vital business for the future. Healthcare organizations need better understanding of the data, not necessarily more data, but a better understanding of what they have in hand. And to do that, they have to have informed decision making. Data should drive the decision-making. I'll say it again. Data should drive decision-making. But you would be surprised how often emotion drives decision-making in healthcare organizations. It's kind of sad. Something bad happens that has happened one time in a given procedure in 100 years, and suddenly we make massive changes to guarantee that that one possibility never happens again in the next 100 years, which it probably won't. So, on the other hand, if we have a procedure that looks very risky, but we've had no morbidity or mortalities from that, we are reticent to make any restrictions on that procedure, even though we know that that's a possibility. So data should drive the decision-making process. Standardized reports, i.e. the dashboards, are usually not helpful in transformative, innovative decision-making. They are usually don't help that. And to be useful information, it has to be accurate, it has to be timely. Knowing what happened 5 years ago is not relevant, usually. It has to be relevant, it has to be directed specifically, and it has to be analyzed appropriately. And it has to be visualizable, and I'll say visualizable, meaning people have to be able to see it and understanding what they're seeing. They have to understand that what they need to do to create improvement and what the information is saying to them, what the data is saying to them. So we look at the analytics journey. The use of analytics improves the quality and performance of the healthcare organization. Analytics professionals will have an ever-increasing role in healthcare in the future as we have to try to understand the more complex and comprehensive data. Quality improvement, IT, if you will, and analytics should work together. And today's tools will change as technology and the scope of patient care expands and transforms. So you're going to see that we have a pretty important role as far as the analytics journey in our near future. That is the conclusion of Chapter 1. Thank you very much.